I died the night before the college entrance examination, just as my grandmother had cursed. I was finally dead. However, in the dead of night, my grandmother opened my diary and murmured, "Monica, be a boy in your next life. It would be so much better to be a boy. Girls are just meant to endure all this suffering. Being a boy is good." My body was discovered the next morning. The scene was surrounded by a huge crowd. My grandmother, who went out early to buy groceries, passed by, took a look from the outside, and chatted with some people. When she learned that it was a young girl who had died, she shook her head. "This girl is no good. If the one in my house dared to jump off a building, I'd break her legs." I watched her walk away, still muttering under her breath. All those years her family spent raising her, it was all for nothing. Early in the morning, couldn't she have gone somewhere else to die? Not long after, I saw my grandmother come back. She bought the freshest meat, the freshest vegetables, and a bag of freshly baked soup dumplings, which my younger brother loved. Without even counting, I knew there were only 8 inside. Neither my grandparents nor I would get any. They were all for my brother. I followed my grandmother home. She, who should have gone straight to the kitchen, unexpectedly headed towards my room. "Still not up for the exam today? You might as well sleep to death in this bed, if you don't want to study. Go out and find a job." She slammed the door open and turned on the light, but there was no one in the bed. The quilt was open. She started scolding again. The little brat didn't even say a word before going out. No manners at all. Yes, I'm a little brat, and I'm already dead. Only my wandering soul here can still see them. The family learned of my death during breakfast when a neighbor recognized me and came with the police to notify them for identification. I saw my grandmother hurriedly explain, "You've got it wrong. That little girl is taking the exam today," and left early in the morning. But when they saw my blood-stained body and my still, recognizable face, all 3 of them froze. My grandfather widened his prominent ox-like eyes and started yelling at my grandmother. "Are you blind? Didn't you notice that such a big person was missing?" My grandmother, who had never liked me, collapsed on the ground. She finally realized that the girl she had heard about in the morning was me. How was I supposed to know she'd actually dare to die? How could she, after all these years of raising her? She hasn't paid us back a single cent. How dare she jump off the building and die? My grandmother tried to get up from the ground and, with a trembling hand, raised it to hit my body. She was stopped by the police and my younger brother. A diary and a pen were found on the rooftop. Only her fingerprints were on them, and after comparing the handwriting, it was confirmed to be hers. This is an old residential area, and there are no surveillance cameras. Currently, it can be confirmed that she jumped from the rooftop of the 7th floor and died instantly. However, there are some traces on the rooftop, so the possibility of homicide cannot be ruled out. The investigation is still ongoing. My diary, I didn't want them to read it, but I couldn't stop them. My grandmother couldn't read, so my younger brother and grandfather were the ones looking at it. My younger brother remained silent with red-rimmed eyes, and my grandfather, after reading 2 pages, immediately raised his hand to hit my grandmother. "Why did you always tell her to go die?" My grandmother, confused, raised her hand to block, and the police also stepped in to stop them. My grandfather kept shouting, struggling with his old body to hit my grandmother. When his hands were held back, he tried to kick her. "Have you no shame? How old is she and how old are you? You drove her to death." My grandmother was angry and anxious. "What did she write, Leo? What did your sister write?" My younger brother didn't answer and kept flipping through the pages. My grandfather was an accountant, while my grandmother had never been to school. She suffered from her illiteracy and had never won an argument with my grandfather in her life. My notebook was filled with words. How could there be just a single sentence about her telling me to die? I wrote about how she didn't like me, how she gave everything good to my brother while I got nothing. I wrote about how she beat and scolded me, and how when I turned to my grandfather for help, he only got angry because I disturbed his afternoon nap and slapped me. I wrote about how my brother, who already had so much, still fought with me over everything, even a plate of peanuts, taking them all to share with his classmates and not leaving any for me to eat with my plain porridge. Leo, what did she write? Is it all nonsense? Blaming everything on me. This little brat can't even let me have peace after she's dead. I should have strangled her when she was born. Grandma, my younger brother's voice trembled. I'll call Dad first. Oh, I also wrote about my father and mother, but they divorced ages ago. My mother already had a new family. Would she come back? My father came back first. After quitting smoking for many years, he sat there in silence, smoking while reading the diary. My father liked to start his own businesses, but he had always failed, and our family had never been well off. My grandfather was scolding my grandmother in the living room. My grandmother was sitting at the table muttering to herself, and my younger brother had gone back to his room and shut the door tightly. She's dead, so what, if you have the guts, kill me too. My grandmother suddenly retorted, I'll beat you to death. My grandfather rushed at her with the belt in his hand but was stopped by my father. Frowning, my father said, Dad, Mom, stop arguing, you're both tired, take a rest. Tired? You know I'm tired. How many years have I worked like a slave for this family? I haven't had a single day of rest since I married into this family. Now that she's dead, you're blaming me. What does it have to do with me? Isn't it your fault for not raising her properly? My grandmother pushed my father away, and tears streamed down her face. What kind of decent girl jumps off a building, and she wrote all this nonsense to scold me? I say she deserved to die, Mom. This was probably the first time my father had ever raised his voice at my grandmother. As soon as he shouted, he immediately pleaded with a sad and tired expression, Mom, she didn't scold you. Monica is my daughter, and now she's dead. We drove her to her death. Mom, I have no daughter anymore. My father covered his face with his hands and squatted down. The living room fell silent for a while. For the first time, I noticed that my father's hair had turned quite white, and his back was hunched. In my memory, he always liked to wear a neat and clean suit. Looking high, spirited as he attended various dinners, traveling far and wide, and coming home every once in a while, but they always told him that I was no good. I still remember the time when there were guests at home, and my grandmother told me to cook. I was going to obey at first, but when I looked up and saw my younger brother, who was only a year younger than me, playing games beside me, I didn't want to go. Then she cut up all my books and small items in my room and burned them to ashes. We had a fight that day. She cursed at me horribly, and I fought back while crying. Of course, I didn't win, but since then, I never called her Grandma again. She went to my father to complain, saying that I had grown too big for my britches and wanted to leave. When my father talked to me alone, he always liked to show me the scars he got from his ventures. He said, Monica, you're not a child anymore. Why can't you give in to your younger brother? Dad works so hard outside. It's not easy for me. When will you grow up? I remember I refused to speak and just sat by the bed, crying as I looked at the scars on my father's body. I felt so guilty for causing him trouble and sorry for all his hard work. I thought I was really too much. I wrote all these things in my diary, desperately blaming myself for being so naive. But I couldn't let go of the resentment in my heart. And I felt even worse about myself. My father must have seen all this just now. My grandmother wiped away her tears. I won't say anything more, but don't blame me either. The police said she might have been pushed, so it has nothing to do with me. She got up, supporting herself with her legs, her over 70-year-old body swaying. But my grandfather said, it's still your fault for not keeping the door locked and letting her out. My grandmother was about to retort, but my grandfather slammed the door and left. I wanted to go in and see my younger brother. I passed through the wall of his room and saw him sitting on the floor, leaning against the wall. Suddenly, his phone rang. It was Mom. My younger brother answered it, and her voice came through. Baby, I was driving your little brother to school just now. What's up? My mother's voice was so gentle, but she wasn't my mother anymore. She was the mother of my younger brother and that other little brother. Mom, my sister is dead, I heard my younger brother say, his voice choking with sobs. But shouldn't he be happy? Now he could have everything without worrying about me taking even a tiny bit. But he was much sadder than I had imagined. Mom, my younger brother suddenly raised his voice, crying, Sister is dead. My mother fainted. It was that uncle who called to say so. It turned out that one of my mother's good friends had just died of cancer 2 months ago. My mother was very emotional, and she still hadn't gotten over it. Now, she had learned of my tragic news. The uncle scolded my younger brother for being thoughtless, but my younger brother just nodded calmly and kept saying sorry. I, the soul eavesdropping beside him, cried, I was so bad, torturing my mother again. When my mother used to come and see us, she liked to tell me, it took a lot out of me to give birth to you. I was in excruciating pain. I was barely an adult when I was pregnant with you. And your father had no money at all. Monica, you're also the flesh and blood that I carried in my womb for 10 months. How could I not love you? I believed she loved me and felt so sorry for the pain she endured during childbirth, but every time my mother talked to me, besides stories about how hard it was back then, all she talked about was that younger brother. I knew that he didn't eat fatty meat, scallions, eggs, or drink milk. I knew that he wet the bed when he was 8 and that he liked to bring snacks to a girl named Mia. I also knew that he had always liked to sleep next to my mother since he was little. All these things my mother told me, but I had never met him. In fact, my mother didn't really like talking to me because I always had nothing to say. I would just sit there in silence, listening, and couldn't keep up with the conversation. She liked chatting with my younger brother. Everyone said he had a sweet tongue. By the time my mother arrived, my body had been tidied up. She leaned over to look at my face and cried silently. My heart ached so much seeing her like this. My father went up to support her, but she waved his hand away. Why did she jump off the building? How did you take care of her? Why did she jump? My mother was crying so hard that she could barely catch her breath, and her words came out in fits and starts. My grandmother was about to speak when my grandfather suddenly said coldly, "You, as a mother, are blaming us." She said you didn't like her, that you only loved your other son, that you didn't want her, and that's why she couldn't take it and jumped. My mother was stunned, her mind in a complete mess, and her body kept swaying backward. Did she really say that about me? Her beautiful face was covered in tears. I didn't. I rushed forward to explain. I just wrote that I felt Mom loved my little brother so much, and I also wanted to be loved by Mom and be talked about by her like my little brother. My grandfather was lying. My mother fell to the ground, crying. I was so anxious to help her up, but I couldn't touch her. My hand passed right through her. Fortunately, my younger brother and father came to support her. My mother hugged my younger brother and sobbed loudly, pounding her chest. I was so bad. Mom would probably blame herself for the rest of her life, having just lost a good friend and now her daughter. I couldn't even imagine how devastated my mother must be. My body was being cremated at the funeral parlor. I went back home and tried again and again to pick up that diary and burn it, but I couldn't. The wind blew in through the open window and flipped a few pages of the diary. It read, "It's so great. Dad bought a house, a 3-bedroom, 1-living-room apartment. Grandpa said we should add my brother's name too, so it will be easier for him to get married." I didn't dare to ask if I would have a share because they didn't even look at me when they were talking, but then again, it's Dad who worked so hard to buy it. I'll also save up and buy my own house in the future. I didn't have a funeral. Grandpa said my death was disgraceful, and our relatives and friends would laugh at us if they came. Many residents in the community had already moved out and were trying to sell their houses. Mom didn't stay at home. She found a hotel nearby. Dad said she could stay in my room, but it was originally a storeroom that had been converted. It had no windows, and there were several bags of beans in the corner. It was small and messy. Thankfully, Mom didn't come to stay. In the evening, I sat in the living room, staring intently at that diary, hoping it would rot on its own. The house was quiet, and everyone was in their own rooms. In the middle of the night, I heard sounds coming from my grandparents' room. Grandma leaned against the wall and walked out in the dark. She picked up the diary from the table, went into my room, closed the door gently, and turned on the light softly. I watched her flip through my diary page by page, her wrinkled face almost pressed against the pages. "You wrote all these things to scold me. Do you hate me that much?" I saw a tear fall on the paper. She quickly wiped it away with her sleeve, afraid of damaging the paper. Then she wiped away more tears, and once she started, she couldn't stop. She sat on the edge of the bed. The dim yellow light shone on her cloudy eyes, and the wrinkles on her face spread like ivy. Grandma looked so old. Her eyes were empty as she murmured softly, "But isn't this how everyone goes through life, Monica? This is how my mother taught me. Boys definitely need to be taken better care of than girls. Am I really wrong? You're already dead, and you still want to scold me. Why didn't you tell me when you were alive?" Looking at the pain on her face, I didn't know what to say. I wouldn't have said it even when I was alive. I had put everything I wanted to say in the diary because no one in this family would listen to me. All these words would be considered rebellious and wrong in their eyes. "Monica, be a boy in your next life. It would be so much better to be a boy. Girls are just meant to endure all this suffering. Being a boy is good." Grandma repeated these words in a low voice over and over again. The room had no windows, and the stuffy air made me feel uncomfortable. Wasn't Grandma also trapped by the thoughts of her era? She had been treated this way since she was a child. She had never been to school and worked at home all day. She didn't realize that the ideas everyone believed in during her time were already outdated, but her educated husband didn't say anything, and her educated son was just filial. As the thoughts of the times advanced, Grandma was held back by the old ideas and left behind. She had always believed that boys were more precious than girls. Maybe Grandma had also wanted to be a boy in her next life. There were also some memories of Grandma being kind to me. They weren't many, but they did exist. When I was a child, our family was very poor. I was so envious when other children ate candy. If they dropped a piece of candy on the ground, I would look around. When no one was paying attention, I would pretend to pick something up and put the dirty candy in my pocket. After school, I would wash it with clean water and eat it. It tasted of water, but it was sweet. My younger brother didn't need to do that. He occasionally had pocket money, a few cents at first, and later a few dimes. He always had some. When I ate the washed candy, Grandma was picking vegetables next to me. She asked if I had picked it up. I smiled and said, "Yes, it's delicious." She said, "Don't pick up things like that in the future. How do you know if that person is sick or not?" I didn't know if others were sick, but I was often ill. I used to drink water boiled with all kinds of herbs. It was extremely bitter. The first sip would make you want to vomit, but after that, every time I took my medicine, there would be a small piece of candy, which was enough to offset the bitterness. Later, I found out that Grandma would bring those candies back from banquets. She would ignore the strange and disdainful looks from others and stuff them into her pockets. Dad went to the police station every day to ask about the progress of the investigation, but without surveillance and more evidence at the scene, the investigation didn't make much progress. They didn't tell Mom about this. Mom came to see me every day, and my younger brother accompanied and comforted her every day. 3 days after the college entrance examination ended, my homeroom teacher came with all the classmates in the class. There was a photo of me on a table by the wall, the one from my student ID. My homeroom teacher was Ms. Lisa, who taught Chinese. I was very good at Chinese, and she always liked me, saying I was well behaved and had good grades. She had been taken to the police station for questioning before, and her eyes were already red when she came. I don't know who pushed her off. Monica had such good grades. As long as she performed normally, she would definitely get into a key university. Only then did Mom know that I might not have jumped off by myself. But she didn't have the strength to argue with Grandpa about why he didn't tell the truth. Several of my close classmates were crying uncontrollably. They had just found out about this when they had their farewell dinner yesterday and agreed to come to my house today. Among the crowd, a girl suddenly knelt down and cried, I'm sorry, I didn't know she went to the rooftop that night to commit suicide. She just told me she was a little nervous about the exam, that the room was stuffy without windows, and she was going out to get some air and calm down before going back to sleep. Her name was Nina, my best friend. I did tell her those things that night. She kowtowed to my mother, and it made me so sad. I tried to stop her several times, but I couldn't. Mom stopped her for me. She took Nina to my room and asked her many questions, all about me. This was the first time Mom had learned so much about me. She also held Nina in her arms and gently soothed her. Mom said, I've never held Monica like this. She must hate me. She never told me anything. Nina knew everything about me. She said she didn't dare. She was afraid of disturbing your life, that if you got distracted, Uncle would blame you and make things hard for you and your new family. She doesn't hate you. Monica told me she really loves you. After Nina finished speaking, Mom held her face and looked at her carefully, as if she was looking at me, then hugged her tightly and cried softly. Mom had a round face, which made her look very fortunate and beautiful. But now her eyes were swollen. I also leaned into Mom's arms, as if she was holding me. I was so envious of Nina. She was an only child, doted on by everyone in her family. She even got the hug from Mom that I wanted the most. Nina said, Auntie, can you take Monica with you? Mom was confused and asked with a sob what she meant. My parents told me they would take me to City A after the college entrance examination. Monica asked if she could go with me. She said you lived there, and she hadn't seen you for a long time and wanted to visit you. Nina took the initiative to tell Mom about my life here. After Nina left, Mom turned off the light in my room, In the dark and stuffy room, the atmosphere was oppressive. I heard Mom's sobs. I gently hugged Mom. Actually, I didn't have to go. I just wanted to see her and didn't mean to disrupt her life. Mom had also had a hard life before. She was very good at studying, but her parents didn't let her continue her education. They made her go out to herd cows all day. Later, when she entered society, she met my irresponsible father. She had me and my younger brother at a young age, but in the end, Dad was unfaithful and unstable, and he let her down. It wasn't easy for her to get to where she was now, but when I closed my eyes and hugged Mom, the door of the room suddenly opened. I looked back and only saw Mom's straight back. I heard Mom say firmly, "I'm taking Monica with me, Ms." Lisa and the classmates had already left. Mom had a huge argument with my grandparents. Dad tried to mediate between them. My younger brother just watched without saying a word, but I saw his red eyes fill with tears again. I suddenly remembered that my younger brother used to be very talkative, but these days, he hardly said anything. Even when he was with Mom, he just listened quietly. He had become like me, the kind of person Mom didn't like. I stood next to my younger brother and watched the people in the living room arguing loudly. Mom was determined to take me away, but Grandpa said that no matter how they treated me when I was alive, I was a child of the Chin family and couldn't be taken away by an outsider who was already divorced. The usually gentle Mom cursed. She left a diary, didn't she? Do you dare to take it out and let me see? Let me see how you treated her, if you hadn't forced her. Would she have gone to the rooftop and met with an accident? Kevin, this family of yours is rotten to the core. If you're a real man and a good father, let me take her away. Dad closed his eyes gently. Impossible. Don't scold Mom and Dad like this. After all, they're your elders. Bah, elders. What right do they have to be called elders after driving my daughter to death? Mom was very emotional, and I was worried she might faint again. My younger brother's fingers twitched. Mom. He called softly. Dad, Grandpa, Grandma, Sister is still watching us. Do we have to argue like this? Everyone followed his gaze. My portrait on the table in the corner had fallen over due to the pushing and shoving. My younger brother went up and set it upright. Everyone's name is in Sister's diary. Everyone was mentioned in the diary, full of confusion and regret. Let's figure out what happened to Sister that night first, and then decide where to lay her to rest. My younger brother said with a calm expression. He rarely showed such maturity and spoke so little. Everyone calmed down. Mom took a deep breath. I must take her with me. This was Monica's wish. After saying that, she picked up her bag and left. I didn't know why, but my spirit still hadn't dissipated. I could even freely appear around them. I followed Mom to the police station and watched her return empty-handed. She sat in the car for a long time without moving. In the end, she couldn't drive and called a chauffeur to take her back to the hotel. She kept looking through my WeChat moments, which were set to be visible only for the last 3 days, but there was nothing left to see. I went back home. Grandma was cleaning the house with a broom, wiping everything clean with a wet cloth. Grandpa put on a hat and went out. He went to a tea house by the nearby river and sat there for the whole afternoon, when an acquaintance passed by and greeted him. He just stared blankly and didn't respond. I knew it was just because Grandpa was old and his hearing wasn't good. Grandpa was short and small, but he had an imposing manner. He had done well in school and had even graduated from high school in his time. He worked as an accountant and was in charge of the family finances. He was very generous to my younger brother, but I had to plead for a long time to get a little money. The same was true for Grandma. Once, when Grandma went out to buy groceries and asked Grandpa for money, Grandpa was drinking tea and chatting at the tea house. She had to wait for over half an hour before he reluctantly gave her $10. But $10 wasn't even enough to buy a pound of meat, and Grandma needed to buy food for the whole family for 3 days. I also wrote these things in my diary. Since Grandpa could read, he must have seen them. But Grandpa was an educated man and the head of the family. His pride was the most important thing. Another day passed, and the police called Dad and asked them to go to the police station. When I got there, I saw a person sitting with his back to us, his head hanging low. Behind him were his parents. I recognized them. They were the family living upstairs in our building. It was he who accidentally pushed me off the rooftop. As soon as his parents saw my family arrive, they immediately apologized, and he also stood up, lowering his head and saying sorry. Dad clenched his fists and was about to rush up and beat him on the spot, but was stopped by the police. Mom rushed up from the other side and slapped him hard. His parents, not noticing in time, immediately pulled their child behind them. Is this how you teach your child? Do you know that he's a murderer? Mom was extremely emotional. Grandpa and Grandma also joined the quarrel, launching a stream of abuse at them. The couple just gently checked the slap mark on their child's face. Looking very distressed, the police were there to prevent anything else from happening. His father turned around. I've already disciplined him. He's been in a daze these days and keeps having nightmares, saying that a ghost is haunting him. He's already been punished. The police nodded. When we were conducting routine questioning, we noticed his abnormal behavior, and that's how we found out. He has confessed everything that night, due to the great pressure. I did sit by the edge of the rooftop and thought about jumping off, but I thought that after the exam, I could go and see Mom, and it wouldn't be too late to die after seeing her. Also, I hadn't decided on a way to die yet. If I jumped like that, the housing prices in this area would surely drop, and I might even get scolded after death. So I was just sitting by the edge of the rooftop writing in my diary. Then he came. He crept up behind me like a ghost, suddenly poked me in the back. And when I turned my head, he suddenly made a scary face. With his other hand, he grabbed the corner of my clothes and pushed me outward. It was dark, and I was frightened, but he didn't hold on to me firmly, and I fell off the rooftop and died. He knelt down, crying. I just wanted to scare her. I didn't mean to push her off, but she didn't hold on to me tightly, and she fell. I really didn't do it on purpose. His parents also knelt down. Our child has always been timid and honest. He definitely wouldn't commit premeditated murder. These days, he's been living in fear, and his father has already whipped him with a belt. He's already been punished. Please forgive us. We will compensate you. Mom gritted her teeth. She wanted to hit him again, but the police were already on guard. This is a police station. Pay attention to your behavior. Fighting and brawling are prohibited. As soon as the police officer's words fell, a figure rushed out from the side and kicked the boy. I saw my younger brother grab the boy by the collar, press him to the ground, and punch him one after another, as if venting his anger. The police were shocked and rushed forward to pull him away. It took a lot of effort to separate them. When the crowd dispersed, I saw the boy with blood all over his face, and his white clothes were stained with blood. His parents rushed up and picked him up. His father roared, "You hit someone in the police station. This is a crime. Why don't you arrest them? Is there no law in this world?" Grandma spat. "Your son committed murder, which is a crime. He should go to jail. He should spend his whole life in prison. He's only 13 years old. Even if he killed her, it was an accident. At most, we'll compensate you," his mother shouted back. This time, the police completely separated the two sides to prevent further fighting. His father clamored to have his injuries examined and demanded that the police arrest my younger brother. Mom hugged my younger brother, brushed aside the messy hair on his face, and looked calm. Leo was born in December. He's only 15 years old now. His son killed his sister, so it's normal for him to be emotional. My younger brother had a blank expression, and there were still bloodstains on his face from the other person. He said, "We can also compensate you." The other mother suddenly stood up and pointed at her son. "You hit him, you'd better beat him to death. Then our family won't compensate you, and you'll have to pay with your life for my son." Mom pointed at their family with trembling fingers. "Isn't it enough that your son killed my daughter? Now you want my son to pay with his life? What a vicious heart you have. You have no manners. Why didn't you die instead?" Grandma joined in the scolding. Grandpa, with the dignity of the head of the family, had his hands behind his back and glared at the other family. I was anxious as I watched from the side. In the end, the police had to separate the two parties and give them serious lectures respectively. Only when both sides had calmed down were they arranged to discuss the compensation together. During the compensation negotiation, Mom didn't say a word. Grandpa basically did the talking. Dad listened, Grandma chimed in, and my younger brother stayed with Mom. This negotiation lasted for several days, and Grandpa hired a lawyer. I kept listening to the discussion of the price of my life. Finally, the compensation was set at $380,000. Mom didn't take a single penny. Instead, she used this opportunity to negotiate with Grandpa. "I don't want anything. I just want everything in her room, her ashes, and her portrait." Grandma disagreed. "I raised her with so much effort. Why should you take everything away just because you say so?" But Grandpa agreed. Grandma made a fuss, and Grandpa pushed her aside and walked out of the police station. Dad supported Grandma. "Mom, what do you want to keep them for? Just give them to her. This was also Monica's last wish. I wrote on the last page that I wanted to go to Mom. I wrote it that night. Grandma leaned most of her weight on Dad, and her voice was hoarse and full of the marks of time. Tell me the truth. How much did she scold me? She didn't scold you. She didn't scold anyone, Dad replied with a choke in his voice. I just recorded my feelings. I just wrote about my confusion and hopes. I stood beside Mom and heard Grandma, who was walking away, say, I don't know either. I just want to keep something. I'll clean her room spotless. I won't go out. Can I just go to her room and talk to her for a while when I have nothing to do? Will she not want to see me? She was confused and hesitant, her voice old and hoarse. I seemed to see the thin and bent figure of her standing in front of the meat stall for an hour when the meat prices soared, waiting until the crowd dispersed, just to ask the boss to sell her a pound of meat $2 cheaper. At the entrance of the police station, Mom held my younger brother in her arms. Leo, Mom is sorry for your sister and also for you. But Mom can't take you away. Will you blame Mom too? My younger brother was very obedient and said no. He even patted Mom on the back to soothe her. Mom cried and said, if there's anything Mom did wrong, will you tell Mom? Don't keep it in your heart like your sister did. Mom is scared. Mom has already lost so much. Mom can't lose you too. My younger brother, with red eyes, said yes. She drove my younger brother home, and I floated back. When I left, the family behind me also came out. I heard the boy's mother say, what kind of decent girl goes to the rooftop in the middle of the night? Maybe she was going to jump off anyway. I've heard that old man and old woman scold her plenty of times. I can't even count how many times she ran out crying. Who knows if she was trying to blackmail us on purpose. His father patted him on the shoulder and sighed. Fortunately, you killed their daughter. If you had killed their son, this matter wouldn't have been settled with just $380,000. Mom took everything of mine. Grandma got home first and hid the diary, even though she couldn't read a single word, but she knew it was full of my accusations. Mom wanted the diary, but the whole family tried to persuade Grandma, and she still didn't take it out. No one knew what she wanted to do by keeping my diary when she couldn't read a word. In the end, Mom didn't get it, even though Grandpa had intervened. Grandma still didn't say a word. Mom bought a gravestone for me and buried me. I followed her to the outside of her house and left when she opened the door. I was already dead, and there was no need for me to pry into her life anymore, as long as Mom was doing well, but I could still follow my family around. Although my body was becoming more and more transparent, I often saw Grandpa go out for tea, my younger brother go to school, Dad go out to start a business, and Grandma stay at home alone, sitting in the storeroom with only 4 bags of beans. Holding my diary and sitting there for the whole afternoon. It was pitch black, and no one knew what she was thinking. I was afraid she might do something stupid, so I followed her a few times, but Grandma didn't do anything. It seemed that she was already used to such a lonely, quiet, and dark life, as if she had lived like this for the past few decades. Occasionally, I would hear her murmur softly, why, it's always been that boys are better. When will girls be as good? Grandpa still went out for tea, played cards, and took walks as usual. Life soon returned to normal. He deposited the majority of the $380,000 in my younger brother's account, saying it was for my younger brother's future marriage. The remaining small part was kept for family expenses. He got up early and started going grocery shopping with Grandma every day. But that was all they did together. He still brought freshly baked breakfast for my younger brother every day. My younger brother had always liked eating breakfast from outside, and Grandpa and Grandma always indulged him. Dad no longer spent all day trying to start a business as before. Instead, he found a stable job. Every day when he came home, he would talk to my younger brother and care about his life and schoolwork. Sometimes, he was afraid that he was pushing too hard. So he deliberately stopped the conversation. My younger brother also understood what he meant. When Dad didn't talk, he would quietly read books and do his homework. My younger brother had changed a lot since he learned of my death. He had become much more silent and worked much harder at his studies. He had repeated a grade twice before, but now his grades had improved from the bottom of the class to the upper middle level, and they were getting better and better. I also saw the light in his room stay on later and later. Studying was just one aspect. He also learned to deliberately leave a portion of everything for others, instead of taking everything for himself as he used to. Maybe it was because he read what I wrote in my diary about these things, and he was consciously changing himself. Later, it became a habit for him. Mom started coming back to see my younger brother once a month. When she wasn't busy, she would stay here for several days and accompany him. During the winter and summer vacations, she would take my younger brother to travel all over the place to help him relax. Everyone was consciously changing their bad habits and treating my younger brother better. My body was becoming more and more transparent, to the point that I couldn't go very far anymore, only staying within 100 meters of home. On my birthday the next year, all the family members went out. I knew they had gone to the gravestone in City A to visit me, but I couldn't leave this home anymore. My body was so transparent that it was almost invisible, and I knew it was time for me to leave. Almost all the residents in this building had moved out. Those who could sell their houses had sold them, and those who couldn't sell had rented them out to others. Only our family still lived here. The cage that had trapped me for 17 years, I was finally going to leave it completely. I lay on the bedboard in my room, feeling my body fading away. Suddenly, I heard voices one by one, very clearly. Monica, Mom misses you so much. Mom was wrong. Mom shouldn't have ignored you for so many years. Not long after, I saw Grandma come back. Girl, have you been reincarnated yet? I've asked. And now girls are becoming more and more precious. You'd better be reincarnated as a girl too, Monica. This is the crispy duck, milk tea, and soup dumplings you said you wanted to eat. I've brought them all to you, the snow mountains, the sea, that you wanted to see. I've seen them for you. Each voice came from far, far away. Finally, it was my younger brother's voice. Sister, I talked to Ms. Lisa. She agreed to let me transfer to her class. Don't worry, I'll get into the key university for you. Sister, Mom, Dad, Grandpa, and Grandma are treating me better now, but it should all have been yours. If you were still alive, sister, I'm sorry, sister, I'm sorry. After hearing the first story above, what are your thoughts? Feel free to share your opinions in the comments section. Next, let's continue to see another similar story. My mother is extremely misogynistic. Even though I am her daughter, ever since I was born, she has wished she could kill me. I would get beaten for wearing lipstick, for wearing a skirt, and even more so for getting close to my father. On the eve of the college entrance examination, my extremely misogynistic mother spread malicious rumors about me at school. She said that I was seducing my own father. This forced me to jump off the 15th floor. My mother was quite satisfied with this outcome. In the hospital, the doctor happily took me from the neonatologist and told my mother, "It's a baby girl. Her skin is white and shiny. She'll definitely be beautiful when she grows up." Upon hearing this, my mother's originally somewhat weak complexion changed instantly. She suddenly grabbed the hair of the young female doctor and slapped her several times. My mother's curses echoed throughout the corridor. "You bitch, did you secretly replace my son? I clearly ate so many dried geckos. How could it not be a son?" Later, an old doctor took my mother and me to do a paternity test. The moment she got the report, my mother completely lost her composure. The look in her eyes when she stared at me was as if it was laced with poison. It was my aunt who was quick-witted and called my father over, and only then did the matter come to a temporary end. Because of this phone call, my mother gave my aunt a hard time. Later, when my mother's health improved a bit, my father took her home to recuperate. My aunt was worried and came to see me. In the room, the baby's cry was so weak that it was almost inaudible, and my father was holding a bowl of freshly cooked millet porridge, feeding it to my mother mouthful by mouthful. "Lucas, you swear that you will only love me in this life and won't stop loving me just because we have a daughter. You can't hold her, and you can't kiss her." After a moment, my father responded with an "okay." The warm afterglow fell into the room, and the seemingly warm and harmonious scene made my aunt break out in a cold sweat. Speaking of which, my father kept his promise. At least in my memory, we have never had any physical contact. But even so, my mother still didn't let me off. When I was 7 years old, as soon as I got home after walking 5 kilometers, a slap landed on my face. The reason was that she saw my photo on my father's phone. "You're learning all sorts of improper things at such a young age. Who taught you this?" My mother poked her phone at my nose and cursed. I didn't know what she meant, so I could only look for my father's figure in the room, seeking help. But what awaited me was just a severe beating. After that, my photo never appeared on my father's phone again, and I will never forget the way my mother looked so proud as she was asserting her sovereignty. When I was 13 years old, it was my father's birthday. I got up early and quietly put the gift on my father's desk in his study. It was a piece of clothing. I spent most of my New Year's money over half a year on this not so expensive knitted sweater. When I got home in the evening, the light in the study was on. And my mother in the living room had a sneer on her face. The floor was in a mess, with broken pieces of fabric scattered around. "Don't think I don't know what you're up to, you bitch." Fists and kicks rained down on me like raindrops, and I rolled on the ground in pain. The light in the study was on, but the door never opened. My mother often poured out her grievances to the uncles and aunts in the community. "I'm so unlucky, my own daughter is a vixen who won't even spare her own father." Almost everywhere I went, people gossiped about me behind my back. I was already used to this, until a new aunt moved in upstairs. She was very nice, spoke gently, and was kind in dealing with others. Every time I was kicked out by my mother, she would bring me some snacks to satisfy my hunger. To me, she was one of the few rays of light in my life. But God didn't favor me for long that day. I was waiting for my mother to finish playing mahjong at the door as usual. The aunt came downstairs. After greeting me and seeing that my lips were too dry, she took out a brand new lipstick from her home and gave it to me. I had never put on makeup before, and I didn't know it was a color-changing lipstick. I happily put it on, and then my mother came back after playing mahjong. When she saw the red color on my lips, she raised her hand and slapped me. This slap knocked me to the ground. And I saw stars. My front tooth was almost falling out because of the hard slap, and the taste of rust spread in my mouth. She cursed so horribly that all the neighbors came out to watch the commotion, but no one stopped her. Maybe in their eyes, I was really like what my mother said, a piece of trash who wanted to seduce her own father. The aunt upstairs also heard the commotion and came downstairs. I didn't want her to see me in such a down-and-out state or hear the vulgar rumors about me. I instinctively tried to hide in the corner, but my mother grabbed me and dragged me in front of the aunt. "Did you bitch, give her this lipstick? Do you want to help her seduce my husband? You two are both no good." I stumbled as I was dragged and desperately lowered my head to hide my embarrassment. But at that moment, the aunt protected me behind her. I saw the pity and self-blame in her eyes. I gave it to her. What bad intentions could a child have? How can you, as a mother, say such things about your own child? The aunt used her thin body to block me and tried to make my mother give in with her words. But my mother has never been a reasonable person. She sneered and glanced at me, and I felt a chill down my spine. My mother raised her hand, and the aunt still stood in front of me. She probably couldn't believe that my mother would be violent towards her, but over the years, my mother has beaten so many women that I can't even count them on one hand. Just thinking that there would be scars on the aunt's gentle and delicate face because of me, my heart began to tremble. Therefore, before my mother's slap landed, I rushed up decisively. This was the first time I fought back against my mother. Although I just held her arm tightly, it still brought on more intense beatings from her. In the chaos, my forehead hit the rusty fence beside me, and blood gushed out instantly. Everyone was so scared that they closed the door. My mother still didn't stop. And the aunt was pushed to the ground by her. In a daze, I heard the sound of my father's footsteps as he came upstairs after work. I tried to shout for help with all my might, but I was too weak to make much of a sound. Then the door was closed, without even a moment's hesitation. During this time, the aunt kept pleading for me, changing from blaming my mother at first to compromising later. "I'll leave. I'll move out in a few days and never appear in front of you again. Can you spare this child?" I barely raised my eyes and found that the aunt's face was already covered with tears. I don't know if my mother agreed to the aunt's words or was just tired from beating me, but she casually threw me on the ground like trash and turned back home. Later, I never saw the aunt again. Before she left, she gave me several things. I found a place to hide them secretly and have never been willing to use them. Although the aunt was gone, my mother's hatred for me remained, with each passing year. My mother's disgust for me grew stronger. Recently, when my mother looked at me, there was even a hint of calculation in her eyes. As if I wasn't her daughter but a rival for her husband, I was creeped out by her gaze. But fortunately, I found solace at school. Over the years, even though I had thought about giving up and finding relief countless times in my heart, every time I saw Tina at school, I felt comforted. It was as if all the suffering I had endured for so many years was just to meet a little angel like her. Tina is my best friend at school. She doesn't know about my family situation. Every time she sees the injuries on my face, she will come and give me a hug. "It doesn't hurt, and don't be sad. Those words and that hug are the source of all my strength, and because I am quick at doing things and study well. The teacher also values me very much. I always keep in mind the words the aunt said to me before she left, telling me to study hard. I also believe that as long as I study hard, one day I will be able to escape that place that is like hell and that mother who is like a devil. Later, when I was 18 years old, I was in my senior year of high school. The teacher patted me on the shoulder with a smile, looking at my test paper with satisfaction. Very good. If you keep it up, there's no problem getting into a top university near home. When the mock exam results came out, I was still firmly in the top 10 of my grade. The teacher was very happy and took me and several other classmates in the class to have a meal on the second floor of the cafeteria. After it was over, I fell far behind by myself. God knows how crazy I was with joy, but the long-term suppression had made it impossible for me to smile. The first thing that came to my mind when I thought that I would be able to leave that place in 20 days was that I actually wanted to cry. Mia, don't put too much pressure on yourself. There's still a long way to go in the future. I don't know when the teacher stopped. Maybe he noticed my emotions, so he specifically spoke to comfort me. Just then, Tina came to find me to go home together after school. The vibrant life of the young girl waved at me not far away, somewhere in my heart. A sprout suddenly grew at that moment. Maybe as long as I get through this period, I can be like Tina, with a bright future and a smooth path ahead. That night, when I got home, I saw my mother sitting in the living room again. The familiar scene made my heart skip a beat. I quickly walked towards my room, but my mother grabbed my hair from behind. I fell heavily to the ground, and the school bag on my back hurt my waist. My mother kicked me twice and walked towards the tea table beside her, cursing as she walked. If it wasn't for the guy who came to collect the waste, I wouldn't have known that you bitch, actually dared to hide these things, a skirt, lipstick, at such a young age. You stole money from home to buy such things. You're just trying to steal my husband. My mother picked up those things and threw them at me one by one. They were the lipstick, snacks, and a little skirt that the aunt left me. The former ones had already expired, but I had never been willing to eat them. Now they were scattered all over the ground. I curled up on the spot and tried my best to hold myself tightly, hugging that skirt that gave off a musty smell because it hadn't seen the light for a long time. Just endure it a little longer and it will be over. The pain on my body had become numb. Hope was within reach. As long as I held on a little longer, everything would be over. I comforted myself like this. But an accident still happened. A dozen or so days before the college entrance examination, the school suddenly announced that there would be a parents' meeting. I didn't take it to heart. After all, they had never attended any parents' meetings before. When I was a child, I had also fantasized about the scene of our family being happy together. But later, I got used to it. I might as well consider it a day off for myself tomorrow. But the next day, my mother wasn't at home. It seemed that she got up early in the morning and went somewhere I didn't know. For some reason, my heart was beating wildly. It wasn't until I was on my way to school in the afternoon and saw her humming and playing mahjong downstairs that I finally let out a sigh of relief. I had already contacted the boss I worked for during the summer vacation before and made an agreement that he would take me in this summer too, arrange an employee dormitory for me, and the salary for the summer vacation would be enough to pay my tuition fees. I had such a beautiful plan for the future that I didn't notice the way my classmates were looking at me. There was a bit of glee and disgust in their eyes. It was Tina's sudden withdrawal of her hand that brought me back to my senses. "What's wrong, Tina?" I asked in a trembling voice. Looking at Tina's strange expression, my mother said. Tina stammered and couldn't say a complete sentence. But the alienation in her eyes was something I had never seen before. At this time, the boy beside her helped her finish what she hadn't said. "They said that you're a slut who even wants to seduce her own father." Everyone burst into laughter. It seemed that they found this topic very interesting. The classroom, which had almost emptied out, became lively again in an instant. "Mia, I never knew you were so slutty. You pretend to be so decent. How about trying it with us after the exam? It will definitely be better than your father." I saw the pleasure in their eyes. As soon as I heard their words, my face turned pale instantly. I threw all the things in my hand at them. They easily dodged, and to make matters worse, they kept taunting. "Whoa, whoa, the slut is hitting people." At that moment, all the blood in my body rushed to my head, and I suddenly wanted to die together with them. It was the teacher who stopped me. I followed him into the office in a daze, shaking all over. But the teacher didn't pat me on the shoulder as he usually did. There was a hint of regret and hesitation in his eyes when he looked at me. Mia, your mother has told me everything about you. Maybe you're still young and don't understand what love is. My mind suddenly went blank. I suddenly understood why my mother, who usually played cards in the afternoon, was sitting on my way humming a song today. A chill welled up in my heart, and I walked out of the office without looking back. I buried my head in my collar, as if in this way I didn't have to face anything. The next few days were extremely difficult for me. Tina began to deliberately ignore my existence and instead found another girl to go home and have meals with after school. Those boys who used to hand in their homework would also deliberately hold back their homework from me. When the teacher asked about it, they would deliberately stand up and answer loudly in front of the whole class, "I think she's dirty." The teacher had nothing to say and could only ask someone else to take over my position, but that person would also deliberately miss my homework and then giggle and repeat the same sentence. For a moment, I couldn't find anyone to whom I could pour out my grievances. The huge pressure was making it almost impossible for me to breathe. When I got home in the evening and saw my mother's proud smile, I suddenly understood that this was probably the result she wanted. The bustling crowd below drew my attention back. One young and lively face after another looked up at me, and the words of those rascals in the class echoed in my ears. "Yo, can't stand it already." The notes I had organized over the 3 years of high school were nowhere to be found. They recorded all my hard work over the years. When I found it, it was already in a bucket full of sewage, soaked beyond recognition. The laughing voices of several people came from behind me, and at that moment, I suddenly felt tired. It seemed that even breathing was difficult. I just wanted to live, so why was it so hard? If you can't stand it, just go and die. How do people like you deserve to live in this world? The words of the teenagers were extremely vicious. I ignored them and turned to leave, but one of them suddenly grabbed my arm and said he wanted me to play with him. In a panic, I climbed up to the rooftop. My original intention was just to avoid the harassment of those people. But I forgot that it was exactly the time when there were the most people in the school. The students who had finished their meals returned to the classroom one by one, and they could see me as soon as they looked up. I don't know what my mother said that day, but it's imaginable that there were already a lot of bad rumors about me in the school. So when they looked at me, not a single person's eyes showed sympathy, only sighs. "Is this the girl in class 1 who studies extremely well? I heard that she has an unchaste private life and has had relationships with many people." Her mother said it herself. How could it be false? She even invited me to a hotel a few days ago, but I refused. "I heard she's quite good. What do you know? She's dirty." The rumors were like a snowball rolling bigger and bigger, and they had already crushed me. The explanations of the victim were always so pale and powerless. Someone downstairs urged me to jump quickly, saying that a person like me, whose humanity is twisted and has lost all ethics, simply doesn't deserve to live in this world. I stared at that face I had never seen before for a long time. Finally, amidst bursts of screams, I jumped down. I landed heavily on the ground, and blood spattered everywhere. The crowd fled in fright, but they had already been stained with my blood, and no one was innocent. I didn't expect that I could open my eyes again, holding a remote control in my hand. The TV in front of me had snowflakes on the screen, and the news about a girl in a certain school committing suicide due to excessive pressure before the college entrance examination came out intermittently. I walked in front of the mirror and saw a wrinkled and old face. I didn't expect to see my grandmother again in this way. I was reborn as my grandmother. My mother and my grandmother were not close, so I had very few opportunities to see my grandmother. The red envelopes during the spring festival were the only way this old woman showed her care for me. Every time at this moment, my mother would look at me and my grandmother with a cold smile. In my memory, the distance between the two families wasn't that far when I was wronged as a child. I often ran to my grandmother's house. My grandmother would bring me the snacks she made herself, but in the face of my mother's behavior, she could only sigh. I knew that there were some things that my grandmother couldn't do anything about. In order not to make her worry, I came less often. I took out the old-fashioned mobile phone and checked the time. It had just been 1 day since I jumped off the building. The hatred in my heart hadn't dissipated yet. The insulting words and the calm eyes of those people before I jumped off the building flashed before my eyes like a movie. Finally, it froze on a woman. I leaned on a walking stick and shuffled forward unsteadily. I walked the distance between the two streets that I remembered in half an hour. The familiar door was open, and I heard my mother's voice. these, and the ones here. I don't want them anymore. Just weigh them and take them away. I opened the slightly ajar door. The scrap collector put my things on the scale one by one. There were very few of my things at home. Usually, I slept in that room piled with sundries, those books that I cherished and neatly arranged, and the clothes that I carefully smoothed out the wrinkles and folded and placed in the corner, were all sold out like garbage by them. Why are you here? My mother's voice pulled me back from my memories. I took a lingering look at the books casually thrown into the snake-skin bag and asked in a deep voice, "Where's Mia?" "She's dead," my mother answered quickly, and there was no trace of sadness in her tone. "What about the ashes?" "I donated them. It's in the way to keep them at home." I heard the impatience in my mother's voice, but because there were outsiders present, she didn't lose her temper. I watched my things being moved away little by little. Just when the other person was about to pay and leave with the bag, I suddenly said, "This box was given to Mia by me, right? Now return it to me." My mother frowned and looked at me, then snorted, "Give it to her." It was like a tone of giving charity. In fact, this box wasn't given to me by my grandmother. I just picked it up on the roadside. It contained all the things I cherished. I took the box and sat down. After my mother sent that person away, she found that I was still sitting there and immediately wanted to drive me away. But she didn't know that the purpose of my coming here today was to stay here. My mother and I had a quarrel at home, but this time, she didn't dare to hit me. The shrill quarreling sound quickly attracted the attention of the neighbors. She kept saying the agreement made back then that they wouldn't interfere with each other, and as she spoke, she pushed me, telling me to leave quickly. I don't know what kind of agreement my grandmother and my mother had made. I just followed her strength and lay down on the ground on purpose, crying out and hugging my leg and wailing. The public opinion immediately turned to my side. The faces that usually helped my mother scrutinize me suddenly changed their attitude. Words turned into arrows and flew towards my mother. Although she was overbearing and unreasonable, she also knew that if things continued like this, she would only be the one to suffer. The door was closed, and my mother gave me a fierce glare. When my father came home, he didn't say much about my presence. As long as it was my mother's decision, he had always unconditionally supported it. I thus lived in this original home. Although my mother didn't like the sight of me, she had no choice. Over the years, I would get back all the grievances and insults I had endured from her bit by bit, during the day. I imitated the way my mother used to gossip with the group of old people downstairs, but this way didn't bring me much pleasure, nor did it cause much loss to my mother, so I changed my strategy and set my sights on my father. My mother had the habit of checking my father's phone, therefore, every time we were at home, my father's phone would be placed in the living room openly, making it convenient for my mother to check. I seized this opportunity, while my mother was playing cards. I quickly did something to my father's phone. Sure enough, when my mother came home and saw these messages, her eyes widened. Without saying a word, she put down the chopsticks and rushed straight to Aunt Lucy's house next door. She banged on the door so loudly that it shook. Aunt Lucy didn't know what my mother had seen. She thought it was her card-playing sister inviting her to play cards. As soon as she opened the door, my mother slapped her so hard that her head turned to the side. "Bitch! I treated you so well, yet you actually have your eyes on my husband." My mother kicked and punched Aunt Lucy. No matter how Aunt Lucy explained, she wouldn't listen. I looked at Aunt Lucy squatting on the ground with a face full of pain and wailing, and gradually it overlapped with the one in my memory. When I was scolded by my mother in the past, she would only stand by and say sarcastic remarks. No matter what my mother said, she would echo it. Half of the gossip in the community was spread by them at the card table. Therefore, the first person I thought of for revenge was her. Later, I repeated the same trick several times, no matter how absurd things developed, as long as it was related to my father. My mother seemed to lose her mind and plunge right in. As long as I sent messages on my father's phone today, my mother would be able to go to the person's house on time and knock that person down to the ground the next day. My mother fell out with her former sisters, and no one even invited her to play gambling game. After many times, my mother didn't notice anything wrong, but the group of victims in the community formed an alliance instead. I heard them talk freely about my mother's gossip at the card table, either complaining or accusing. "Wendy has been acting like a crazy person these days, biting everyone she sees. The bruises on my arm haven't healed yet." She insisted that I had an affair with her Lucas. Does she really think her Lucas is some kind of peerless treasure? He's ugly and has a timid personality. In the time it took to play a round of cards, they scolded my mother thoroughly. Unconsciously, my father and mother were isolated by everyone in the community. My mother didn't seem to notice it at all. After all, no one dared to boss her around in front of her, but my father was different. Although he was the source of all these things, in the face of these disputes, he would never say a word. Having a timid personality had thus become his nickname in the community. Every time he walked through the community with his briefcase, those people who had been beaten by my mother would point at him behind his back. My father probably had never seen such a situation. Every time he would involuntarily quicken his pace and flee in a hurry. To be honest, I rarely noticed any changes in this man's expression. In the past, when I was beaten by my mother and was covered in blood, crying out for my father, he could still remain calm, but this time, I saw a hint of anger on his face. I suddenly found it ridiculous. The number of women my mother picked a fight with was increasing day by day. Even if I didn't stir up trouble, my mother could still spontaneously find her enemies. She had aroused the public indignation of many people in the community. Although I knew that this would happen sooner or later, I still wanted to add fuel to the fire. A new female boss had come to my father's company. I knew about this because not long ago, my mother made my father swear again. Just like back then, my mother was extremely sensitive to any new woman who appeared around my father. I secretly flipped through my father's phone and slightly modified a mass email in the company's email. In this way, it seemed that the female boss had invited my father to a party alone. Everything was ready. As I expected, my mother fell into this trap without looking back. According to the information in the email, my mother took a taxi to a restaurant. Today was the day of my father's company's celebration banquet, which was also a welcome party for this new female boss. While everyone was joking and toasting each other, my mother suddenly rushed in and slapped the female boss my father was toasting. Under the clear and crisp sound, everyone at the scene froze in place. "Bitch, I knew it. You're trying to seduce my husband." Only my mother's voice rang out in the room. She reached out to pull the other person's hair and still kept swearing. But this time she clearly met someone who wasn't easily pushed around. Not only my father's colleagues but also my father himself pulled together and dragged my mother, who was making a scene on the spot, out. Some girls even called the security guards. In the end, my mother was carried out of the hotel by several people and thrown at the door. When had my mother ever suffered such an insult? She stood up, patted the dust off her body, and in front of the security guards and colleagues, she raised her hand and slapped my father twice. "Lucas, you've changed. You said you would only love me. Do you also have an affair with that fox spirit?" My mother didn't use much strength. At least there were no red marks on my father's face. But my father got angry. Under the strange gazes of the crowd, the two of them started arguing in front of the company. My mother pointed at the messages from those ants in my father's phone and argued until she was red in the face. But in my father's eyes, those were just ordinary messages. Seeing that the matter seemed to have no end, he simply decided to let things go and started arguing with my mother. He brought up the ridicule from the neighbors these days. He talked about the bitterness he had experienced in his interpersonal relationships over the years. He even mentioned my death, all just to salvage his ridiculous dignity. By this time, the female boss had regained her composure. She arranged her disheveled sideburns, walked out surrounded by everyone, and looked down on my father and mother with an air of superiority. My father was fired. This undoubtedly became another fuse for the quarrel between the two of them. The two of them argued all the way from the company to home. The atmosphere gradually turned cold, and only my mother was still talking non-stop about the bitterness and love she had felt over the years. "Lucas, do you know how many grievances I've endured for you all these years?" My mother wept bitterly, which was a more embarrassing moment than ever before. "I didn't have an appetite for tea or food every day and always thought of you first in everything. In the end, this is how you treat me." My mother had pulled my father's collar into a wrinkled mess. In the face of my mother's heart-rending accusations, he still stood there coldly. No matter what my mother said, he didn't say another word. The stiff atmosphere spread in the room. Just as it seemed that the matter was going to end unclearly like this, my father's phone suddenly rang. The notification sound of the phone rang extremely abruptly in the silent room. My mother's mood, which had just calmed down, instantly became tense again. She grabbed my father's phone, wanting to see who had sent the message, but my father intercepted it halfway. "Stop making a fuss. What else do you want? Our daughter has been driven to death by you." The people in the neighborhood point fingers at me. You claim to care about me, but do you know what they say about me behind my back? They say I'm ugly. Please don't let others laugh at our family anymore, okay? This was the first time my father had spoken harshly to my mother, but it couldn't stop my mother's eagerness to check the phone. In the end, my father couldn't hold out against my mother and handed the phone to her. But it was just a belated dismissal notice. Are you satisfied now? My father's cold voice sounded, and then he left with a swagger, leaving my mother standing there blankly. After being frustrated by my father, my mother didn't restrain herself. Instead, she became even more sensitive and suspicious. She couldn't bear to take it out on my father, but she naturally wouldn't show mercy to others. At the mahjong table in the neighborhood, Aunt Lucy was chatting and gossiping with several other people while eating sunflower seeds. The door of the mahjong parlor was a bit old and could be opened without a key. As a regular here, my mother kicked the door open with ease. Her gaze scanned around like a detector. When she saw Aunt Lucy and the others, she immediately pounced on them like a fierce beast. In the past few days, my father had been leaving early and coming back late to look for a job, but he kept hitting a wall. My father vented all his long-suppressed grievances on my mother and even blurted out comparisons between my mother and Aunt Lucy and the others. Although what my father said was the truth, in my mother's eyes, it meant that they were seducing my father. That's why this scene happened. In front of the small mahjong table, it was extremely lively for a while. The screams of women, the sound of mahjong tiles colliding, and my mother's curses blended together. The crowd watched the farce coldly. The aunts who had been beaten by my mother gradually came to their senses and pounced on my mother one after another. Although my mother had been tough in her behavior over the years and no one was her match, no one was always willing to be bullied, especially in front of so many people. One aunt held down my mother's legs and hugged her waist tightly, and the remaining few grabbed her arms. Aunt Lucy staggered to her feet on the ground. Her hair was already in a mess, and she didn't know where her glasses had flown to. My mother was still lying on the ground struggling and cursing. So angry was Aunt Lucy that she didn't even look for her glasses and kicked my mother several times. I'm telling you, I've put up with you for a long time. Do you think I'm made of clay? When had my mother ever suffered such an insult? She struggled to get up, wanting to teach these women a lesson. But 2 fists can't defeat 4 legs. In the end, my mother was pushed back to the ground. Several women who had been bullied by her kicked and beat her, and she had no power to fight back. She could only curl up on the ground, covering her face, just like I was back then. This was the first time my mother had been defeated by those women. The successive blows made her a bit crazy, even more so than before. She returned home in a daze, with bruises on her face, but my father didn't even ask a word. She had lost her love. Realizing this, my mother became even more absent-minded. She found my father and was just about to speak when she was interrupted by my father's impatient voice. You can't even cook a meal properly after all this time. My father's complaint forced my mother to return to the kitchen, but her hands were shaking constantly while she was cutting the vegetables, and she didn't even notice that the water beside her had boiled. I followed my mother's gaze and saw that the blade was sharp and glinted with a cold light. The meal was cooked, and the atmosphere in the room was terribly low. The 3 people at the table had different thoughts. After lunch, my father went out to look for a job again. My mother sat on the sofa for a long time. Later, I watched her go into the kitchen, take out a whetstone, and start sharpening a knife. The rhythmic sound echoed in the room, making my teeth ache. In the dead of night, the people in the neighborhood were awakened by a burst of screams and the sound of an ambulance. My father was carried out covered in blood and had fallen into a coma. No one knew what had happened that night, and only a few screams were vaguely heard. But I, who was sleeping in the next room, almost witnessed the tragic scene that night with my own eyes. In fact, when my mother started moving around, I guessed what she was going to do, but I didn't stop her. I didn't sleep all night, just waiting for something to happen next door. Sure enough, in the middle of the night, there were screams from next door. While my father was asleep, my mother picked up the sharp knife hidden under the pillow and stabbed it into my father's thigh again and again. She shouted wildly as she stabbed. Lucas, I'm doing this for your own good. Don't worry, you can still live without your legs. I'll stay by your side and take care of you for the rest of my life. Just stay by my side like this and never look at other women again, okay? Blood spurted out, staining the entire bed sheet red and dripping onto the floor along the edge of the bed. My father had already been woken up by the pain, but my mother had used all her strength. His legs had lost all feeling, and he couldn't even lift them. He could only watch helplessly as my mother continued, and I didn't stop her or call the police in the next room. It didn't take long for my father to pass out with a pale face, but my mother didn't notice it at all. She seemed to be in a certain state, believing that only by doing this could she win back my father's heart. I sat on the bed in the next room, quietly feeling everything that was happening, until the end. I didn't help my father dial any emergency call. After all, it was just that they got what they deserved for their evil deeds. It was my mother who finally came to her senses and called the emergency services in a hurry. There was already a small puddle of bloodstains by the bed. She even stumbled when she stepped on it. After seeing the scene in the room, the doctor carried my father into the ambulance, and then my mother was taken to the police station. I followed them, first paid the fees for my father, and then rushed to the police station to make a statement, since the whole thing had nothing to do with me. The statement was taken quickly. Afterwards, I asked the police if I could go and see my daughter. In the partition, my mother was kneeling in the corner, muttering something. I listened carefully and vaguely made out, "I love Lucas, don't let anything happen." Looking at her pious appearance, I suddenly found it ridiculous. What is love? I've never been able to understand it in my life. But everything my mother has done is completely different from the definition of love. Does such a person deserve to be loved? My father died due to excessive blood loss and ineffective rescue. My mother was sent to a mental hospital not long after. She didn't have a good life there. There were many unreasonable lunatics in the mental hospital. I applied for a visit in the capacity of her mother, through the transparent glass of the mental hospital. I looked at her bruised and swollen face and finally asked only one question: "Mia is dead, don't you regret it?" Among all the people my mother targeted, only I lost my life. I wanted to know if, having lost everything, she would feel sorry for what she had done in the past and if she would also know what it was like to be sad, but there was none of that. My mother laughed as if she had heard the most ridiculous joke in the world. She laughed so exaggeratedly that her gums were exposed. I even doubted if she was really crazy. "When you were a child, didn't you treat me the same way?" She suddenly stopped laughing, and the memories of her childhood were broken and cruel in her narrative. It turned out that my grandfather had run away with someone else when my mother was a child. Just because my grandmother couldn't give birth to a son, my grandmother was probably out of her mind during that period and beat and scolded my mother every day. So in my mother's memory, giving birth to a daughter meant misfortune, and keeping her husband was an instinct. Later, my grandmother's mental state recovered, but my mother had changed into this appearance forever. I looked at the woman howling at me through the glass. Her tears and snot were mixed together, and it seemed that she would have an attack at any moment. Several staff members worked together to drag her back. I sat there, my eyes full of indifference. Only incompetent people take out their anger on the weak to seek pleasure. There is no reason to hurt an innocent person. I still hate my mother. But now she poses no threat to me at all. Just the memories and those people in the mental hospital are enough to drive her crazy. It can be considered the retribution she deserves. Later, I also went to my father's funeral. It was my aunt who chose the grave for my father. There were not many people in the funeral home. My aunt held my father's photo in her hand. The monk chanted the stale and boring scriptures. They were still the same. One was silent, and the other talked nonsense. After hearing the two stories above, what are your